There is one Jewish holiday that I never observe. It falls in the summer, usually around July. On the Hebrew calendar, it takes place on the 9th day of the month of Av, and thus its name, Tisha, the 9th, B'Av. Tisha B'Av is a Jewish day of mourning. According to tradition, both the first and the second temples were destroyed exactly on this day. And further on in history, other tragic events landed on this exact spot on the calendar. The rituals of this observance bespeak deep sadness. We fast. We sit on the ground without our shoes. We cry. We wail. Aloud, we read the biblical book of Lamentations, a book of poetic dirges that depict the anguish of Jerusalem destroyed and her people exiled. I have skipped Tisha B'Av for most of my life because, well, I never really felt the need to mourn for the loss of the temple in Jerusalem. I mean, I don't grieve for the end of animal sacrifice, which was, of course, the worship of that day, nor for the end of the elite and often corrupt priesthood. Further, Judaism teaches that while we observe a yahrzeit each year for the people whom we have loved and lost, mourning has a beginning and an end. And in my mind, that should apply to the great temple in Jerusalem as well. And so, Tisha B'Av for me has been like any other summer day until this year. Since we gathered here last High Holy Days, our people, as individuals, as a community, as a nation, all of us, we have suffered profound and painful, life-changing loss. The events of October 7th, the horrific actions of Hamas were barbaric and brutal and devastating. And all that transpired from October 8th until today, to the Israeli people, to the Palestinian people, to us, the American Jewish community, to Jews around the world, all of it was also harrowing and heartbreaking. And now, of course, we add to that list what is happening in Lebanon with Hezbollah. Tisha B'Av suddenly felt so relevant, its observance so timely and essential. The Hebrew name of that book we read, the Book of Lamentations, is Echa, from the word Ech, which means how. All year long, I have been saying, how? Ech, how did this happen? Echa, how is this happening? Echa, how will we recover from the catastrophic events that have happened to us and by us this past year? Lamentations begins. Echa yoshva v'dad ha'ir. How lonely sits the city, which was once great among the nations and is now a widow. Bitterly she weeps in the night. There are no friends to comfort her. Her allies have betrayed her. They have become her foes. Her children have gone into captivity. When her people fell by enemy hands with none to help her, rivals looked on and gloated at her downfall. On and on the anguish verses go, and I feel the pain and loss, both of the past and the present, like a stone in my chest. This year, I have cried and I have worried. I have felt abandoned. I have been anguished and deeply troubled. I have been angry and conflicted and felt despair. Lamentations, Echa, put words to my feelings and our experiences as a people. But I confess that the last time I read that book in its entirety, and by the way, it's only 5 chapters long, was 39 years ago, my first year of rabbinic school in Jerusalem. That year, in my early 20s, in a peaceful Israel with so many exciting things ahead of me, I'm telling you, I felt no connection to this book. And understandably, I didn't notice what I now see as its most important sentence, one line that sits in the middle of the middle chapter, a sentence that this year just jumped off the page. A verse that serves to remind us that, as we have done so many times in our history as a people, we can emerge from this chaos and we can find a path to safety and wholeness and peace. In the middle of the middle chapter, we read, Ulai yesh tikva. There may yet be hope. Ulai is one of my absolute favorite Hebrew words. It means perhaps. Yesh, there exists. Tikva, that word we have all come to know as hope. Honestly, at first, I kind of hesitated to share this verse with all of you because, hope, it's so trite. It's like Pollyannish. We tell others to just have hope when they are really facing tremendously challenging situations. Often we invoke this simplistic optimism merely to soothe our own anxiety. Look, this is not the hope that I'm talking about today, I promise you. The kind of hope I want to lift up is a nuanced, complex hope that holds pain and grief alongside conflict and contradiction. This is the hope I want, and this is the hope I believe can guide us into the future. And my search for insights about this came, as it often does, from the Hebrew. Tikvah, as you know, is that well-known word we know, meaning hope, right? Like Israel's national anthem, HaTikvah, the hope. Remarkably, but maybe not remarkably, the Hebrew gifts us with helpful and astute insights that cannot at all be seen or felt from the English. So a moment of grammar, okay? Grammar lesson of Hebrew. Some of you know that every Hebrew word has as its center a shoresh, a root, usually 3 letters, sometimes 2, and that root has a distinct meaning. And many words can be formed around the root, all of which hold or are connected to that distinct meaning. You're following? Okay. At the center of the word tikvah are the letters kuf and vav, which spell kav. And the distinct meaning of the root kav, interestingly, is rope. You may be wondering how one gets from the root rope to the word hope. I know you are. Feeling it. While we can see in the middle of the word tikvah, we can see the word kav right there, you may be perplexed, as I was, because the connection between these two ideas really isn't apparent. Am I right? In English, hope is like an idea, it's a sentiment, perhaps it's emotion, but in Hebrew, kav, with kav as its root, tikvah, is concrete, it's tangible, it's graspable, and most importantly, it's instructive. So stay with me now. Visualize a rope in your mind's eye. Visualize a rope. If you look closely there, you can see not only those braided strands, right, those big braided strands, but you can also see the twisted fibers or yarns that make up those strands. Can you picture it? Okay. Now, looking into this, I learned something really great. I learned that not only is rope formed by braiding those large strands, the strength of a rope is achieved by the many smaller fibers or yarns that make up the strand, which are twisted in opposite directions to one another. And then in turn, once you get the medium-sized strand, that too is twisted in opposite directions to other strands to create the final product, the rope. I was initially drawn to this image of the rope because since October 7th and all that happened in Israel, in Gaza, here in America, I felt a great deal of despair about the future of Israel and about our future as American Jews. And to be honest, I have been feeling like I've been hanging on by a thread, a very thin kav. And I know that I've spent much of the year grasping for strings, kavim, maybe lifelines. But now, with the root kav, I see that the tikvah, the hope that I have been looking for, doesn't come from grasping at ropes I can or cannot reach, but rather from the configuration of the rope itself. Rabbi Leah Bass, you may know her. She's in Arlington. She's our neighbor and friend. She is a weaver and a fabric artist, and she helped me to better understand this because she spins and weaves her own yarn. She explained to me, and I quote, "The best yarns are created by mixing different materials. Wool is great, but it gets warmer when it's mixed with alpaca, smoother when it's mixed with silk, and stronger when mixed with cotton. Once spun, you have to twist the strands together. The tension created improves the durability of the yarn, ensuring an end product that is both flexible and strong." If, at the end of what has been the most challenging year in our recent history, we are looking for tikvah, hope that there will be a vibrant and just future, we must lean into that kav, that rope that can hold us together not by its singularity or uniformity, but through the multiplicity of fibers and the tension between them that are needed to give it its greatest resiliency, its greatest plasticity, and strength. Ulai yesh tikvah. Throughout the year, I have shared my personal views on the tragedy in Israel and Gaza. I have preached and I have posted, I have sent emails, I have signed petitions. In official messages, the Temple has published the views of the Reform movement, but we have also posted resources that span a wide variety of opinions on the many dimensions of the conflict. In February, Cantor Michaeli and I took a trip to Israel with some of you, and there we met Israelis, Jewish Israelis from the right and from the left. We met humanitarian workers, and we met Palestinians. Some of you did not think this trip hit the right notes. Others did. Our goal was to connect with the full spectrum of values held within this congregation, and that was important, and I believe that was achieved. In March, in my personal capacity, I joined hundreds of rabbis and cantors in signing a letter calling for a ceasefire and the return of the hostages. Some of you were upset. Others of you were pleased. In the variety of programs we have hosted since October 7th, many of you shared a wide range of beliefs about Israelis and Palestinians, about security and peace, about social justice, and about Zionism. I believe this is the way it should be. This is the way it should be. Our varied opinions in tension with each other, that is what will create a kav strong enough to pull us into the future and flexible enough to withstand the uncertain forces that are ahead. We need diversity in our ply. A single strand is a weak rope. The friction that comes when your views rub against mine is healthy. The resistance, it slows us down. It holds us in each other's company. It forces us to look at each other, to hear each other. We may not agree, but in the grip, we can't walk away. This is what it means to be a sacred community. This is why I have remained tied to this congregation for 34 years. At times I have felt stretched. At times I have felt knotted up. But more often than not, this sacred congregation, all of you, have been my lifeline. From us, the sacred, to the world out there, the secular. It turns out I'm not the only one encouraging investment in diversity for communal benefits. Have you heard about this new documentary called Join or Die? No? Yes? Anyone? Yes. Intriguing title, right? So it's by one of America's great social scientists, maybe you know him, Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone, which is a great book, and you should read it if you haven't read it yet. In his new work, and Putnam is always talking about community, he really dives deep into the ideas of social capital, and he presents two different ideas. One type he calls bonding capital, and the other type he calls bridging capital. Now, bonding capital over here comes about when I hang out with people like me, short rabbis, people who love Philadelphia, pie makers. Here in this space, I build relationships in a very comfortable way with the people who share my hobbies and my values. Now, over here we have the bridging capital, which is entirely a different animal. This is what I gain from being with people who are unlike me, who don't share my interests or perspectives, individuals who perhaps vote for a different sports team, or are from a different religion or race or socioeconomic status or political or social view. Now, Putnam suggests that the strength of a society, like the strength of a rope, is directly related to the ability of its members to hold both types of capital. I turn to people in my bonding group when I need chicken soup or a ride to the Phillies game. I turn to people in my bridging group when I need to learn how other people are thinking so that we can collaborate on something, perhaps in the public spaces. And at best, will bring to that conversation curiosity and tolerance and empathy to create maybe unexpected partnerships, new ideas. And by the way, there's friction over here, but the friction that comes from this disparate experience can create and be a source of warmth and energy and even fuel for a more dynamic community. Ulai yesh tikvah. Now, in terms of coming back to our sacred community, Temple Rodef Shalom, most of the time we spend our relationships in bonding capital. I mean, especially this year, we needed each other more than we ever have before. But we are also varied in many dimensions, especially now about that conversation on Israel and its future. Creating bridging capital, holding diverse fibers in a shared cord, is also critical, by the way, to our successful future as a congregation. Everyone in this room is a necessary thread in the rope of this congregation and how to make this congregation strong. Now, allow me to zero in on that kav, that one where the most disparate strands exists, the kav that is about the ideas about Israel. We have really so many views here at Temple Rodef Shalom, and this is like our bridging group. Among our threads, when you think about our congregation, you know we're on a spectrum of age and stage and all those things. Think about one group, for example, people who were born in or people who came of age in the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, they knew a particular type of Israel, an Israel that was an underdog, wonderfully winning wars against a long list of countries that wanted to destroy us. And these people, the 1950s and 1960s, you know, they knew Ben Gurion, and they knew Golda, and they knew Peres. But in that kav, you know, there are other threads. For example, my children, right there, who grew up under totally different circumstances and didn't know Ben Gurion and Golda and Peres. You know who they knew? Bibi and Bibi and Bibi. And they've heard words like occupation and intifada more than they've heard kibbutz and falafel. And you know, I know that their relationship is also profoundly different from mine, since I grew up with an Israel that mostly was peaceful and productive. And that Israel was even different than my own parents, who, for Israel, that was a critical response to the Holocaust. Our kav, it's very diverse. And in that kav, too, are so many people with so many ideas about this thing we called Zionism. And not just one, but of course many. There are lots of Zionisms. There's political Zionism, and those are people who believe that the Jewish state and its government are indispensable to the future of the Jewish people. There's cultural Zionism, people who believe that the arts, music, that come out of the unique experience of living on our homeland, that's critical to the Jewish people. There are labor Zionists. They built the kibbutzim. Many of us here might call ourselves progressive Zionists, who hope to be in relationship with Israel while holding liberal democratic values. And then let's not forget the troubled Zionists, deeply committed to our Israel, but troubled by her actions. And finally, there are the non-Zionists. Allow me to say a little bit more about this last group. There are a growing number of Jews, particularly those in younger generations, who feel that the values and principles of social justice that we taught them are irreconcilable with the civilian Palestinian suffering they witness. This has led them to reject Israel's policies and even to reject Israel itself and many Zionist ideas. The views of non-Zionists, some of whom call themselves post-Zionists, and some of whom call themselves anti-Zionists, are complex and varied. Sometimes they are based on knowledge of history and politics, and sometimes they are based on broader trends and categorizations. Even if we, disagree vehemently. We cannot allow the members of this group to be lost from our nuclear families, from our extended families, your families, my family, this congregational family, and the Jewish people. Many of us are heartbroken by their purging of this elemental component of our people's narrative. Our first home that Jews have lived in and died for thousands of years, our historic and spiritual home, which holds a sense of safety and security for so many of us. It might feel counterintuitive, but we must make room in our braid, the braid of our rope, for these very people. Their strand may be chafing ours, but we need them, close enough to hear and near enough to hold. They are a part of the Jewish future, and their kav sits, as ours does, in the middle of the word and idea, Tikvah. Holding so many strands at once, I know it can be hard. And of course, there are limits. Our rope cannot contain strands of hatred or racism or misogyny or bigotry. That is fundamental. Yet, for some, holding multiple conflicting ideas, even truths at the same time, feels like cognitive dissonance. It's challenging to live with tension and friction. But you know, we have no choice. Our kav sits in the middle of that tikvah, that hope, grammatically, symbolically, and in real time. Hope for the future has as its core an intertwined and varied rope which we must not let fray. Let me end where I began, with the observance of the deeply mournful day of Tisha B'Av. There's a midrash, a creative interpretation, which brings all these ideas sort of full circle. This midrash nestles itself right next to those three words which I only noticed this year, those words of hope sitting in the middle of the saddest book of the Bible. The Midrash declares that the Messiah, that person or movement or idea, metaphoric or real, whose purpose is to usher in an age of peace and justice and kindness and love, that ultimate symbol of our hope, our Messiah will be born on Tisha B'Av. Hope will come on our day of loss and sorrow. Tikvah will emerge from our brokenness and despair, and it will pull us like a rope from the depths, gifting us with new growth and gifting us with a better future. Let us hold on to the rope. Let us weave ourselves into the kav. Ulai yesh tikvah.